Welcome to Lifting Leaders Podcast. This season, we're exploring what it means to light the spark, ignite genuine hope, and lead the change. And today, we're leaning into something that often precedes real change, the courage to name what's not working. This week, we are creating a gems episode from the gems that we mined and were inspired by our last guest, Shirlene Evans. And we really encourage you to go back and take a listen to that episode and hear the full description. But today we're taking just a couple of those gems that we heard and we're going to dive a little bit deeper.
Yes, we are.
Hi, Trisha. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Crystal, how are you?
I'm good.
Happy day. We've had a little snow this last week.
It's finally decided to be winter.
Yes. Well, we had a little bit of snow last week. Let's just say, I mean, I would be happy if we
Tiny
had
flurries.
Yeah, I want 14 inches. And I know every person in the Pacific Northwest who's listening to this right now is going to say, no. But there's just something about having a bunch of snow in your yard that is pretty cool. It inspires me. It makes me want to write a song.
I think it's because we're all terrible drivers in the snow. And so it makes us have to hunker down and focus. And when we get that beautiful snow, it not only looks beautiful, it kind of dampens all of the noise. And so it feels very peaceful.
Well, one thing I've noticed about people in the Pacific Northwest, I'm from all over the world, or all over the country, but most of my life in California. And snow, that's someplace you go to. You don't have it in your yard and stuff. But in the Pacific Northwest, and I love this about us, is that we look forward to the season that's coming. Once it's here, we celebrate it. And then as we get about midway through, it's like, boy, I can't wait until the first day of spring. and it's like, we need to have spring. We need the mountain to be out more often, that kind of thing. And then the day it turns spring, the very day, in fact, probably within the hour of spring turning into spring, all of the daffodils start blooming and the hyacinth and everything that is a bulb is blooming like immediately.
Yeah.
I have never in my life been someplace where when we hit the very first day of fall, every tree that has a leaf that will turn colors, it is turning colors already. It's like, whoa, I've never lived any place like that before. So it's pretty amazing. And but we haven't had much snow this year, and I miss it. I always look forward to a snowy, not a ton of snow, but enough of it that I feel like I've had a chance to walk in it a little bit and admire it and take a ton of pictures and that kind of thing, right? And this year we haven't really had any. We had some snow the other day, and it didn't accumulate, but it sure was pretty well. It was falling, right?
Yeah. A winter wonderland. I love it. Yeah. So, looking back at our episode last week with Shirlene, one of the things that jumped out to me was when we think about what becomes possible when a leader is willing to clearly name what's not working, this idea that we need to build those muscles around candor is really one of the things that she brought out was one way we can do that is to make sure that we understand what's most important to the person that we're talking to or the team that we're talking to. What's important to the organization? Like, what's the vision? What's the values? And what are the most important priorities for them? And then connect that. Whatever this is that we need to talk about, things that aren't working, it may even be something that is working, but might not be very popular. Might be something new that's working, which means we need to let go of something that isn't working as well. So when we have to have these difficult conversations is really making sure that we've aligned that to what does this organization, team, individual, what's most important to them and what are they trying to accomplish? And how does this new information, how does it actually help them to achieve what's most important to them.
Yeah. And, that begs the question, how well do you know the people that you're dealing with, right? It's so important that if you're going to be working with a team or individuals, and if they report to you as a leader, it's really important to get to know who your folks are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how else would you really evaluate that person's performance if you didn't really know how they tick? Because some people will work really, really hard and struggle through all the challenges of the year and come out ahead. And there are other people that really don't put much effort into their job at all, and they seem to excel too. And so, but there are inner workings that go on with both of those and many other personalities too. But it's also, if you know them and you are confident in what you want to talk about or what you need to talk about, you should be able to have those candid conversations or whatever, if you know the people you're talking to, how to approach them.
Yeah.
But to do that, I think you need to know yourself first.
Yeah.
Right? It's really so important to be on the right foundation. And that foundation is what do I need? What have I done? What's my part in this? What do I need to say? How am I going to approach? Have I got all the information?
Yeah.
And there's just so much of that self-assessment before you ever go out and start focusing on other people, right?
Yeah. I think a good example of this in my career has been when I was working with an organization that was really having a lot of trouble finding the right fit for leadership positions. Like they didn't have, their internal folks were not ready for that. And there was a lot of pushback from employees around how they always went to the outside and always brought in somebody that looked good on paper, maybe interviewed well, but took them a long time to get up to speed because they didn't understand the organization very well.
Right.
And also the organization had a lot of things that made it unique. And so that experience and the internal knowledge really helped them be successful. Mm-hmm. So we knew that something was not working right. It was also demotivating for employees because they felt
Very
like they
much.
couldn't get ahead. They could never get that promotion.
Mm-hmm.
The organization knew it was important to have talent that was helping the organization keep moving forward, right? Mm-hmm. And so we were able to bring in a succession planning program. And even though that took resources, it took time, it took leaders time to actually learn how they were going to do that, go through that process, commit to helping people develop into these roles, connecting them to what they valued, which was the sort of legacy of the organization. Like, how do we make sure we've got a sustainable organization that works effectively? And they embraced that succession planning process. It takes a while to kind of fill those ranks to get people ready. But in the end, they were able to see the benefit of that. So more internal people were ready to take those really critical internal leadership roles on.
Yeah, you bring up a good point when you think about, succession in particular. It's something that does take years. When you go through a talent review, which is a formal process for identifying people who have the potential to be in a higher level position. When you go through that process, you have to understand that it's not with the intention of filling that position in a year.
Yeah.
It's within 5 years sometimes. And sometimes it's even more than that, depending on the size of your organization and the kind of talent that you have. And that, what it is it's a plan to, it starts there in identifying the person. And then from there on, you identify the developmental opportunities and risk-taking opportunities that need to take place to put that person, get them ready to be viable candidates, right?
Yeah.
So it's weird, but it is also that knowing your people thing again, right? Getting
Yeah.
to know your folks. I think also succession's a good reason or a good thing to talk about in a way, because in this whole being candid with yourself, there's a need to be candid with how you feel about where you are, right?
Yeah.
Am I in the right place? Do I still have a passion for what I'm doing? Is this project or whatever in jeopardy because I don't have my heart in it anymore, right? It may not be anybody else. It may be just the person that's asking those questions. So I think about, and we were talking about it with Shirlene, is that it's sort of like in the Hudson, the model is cycle of renewal. You've got the doldrums, right? That, and it may be even more than that, but the doldrums is a place where you go when you've done it all before, you've done it to the point of boredom, you really aren't getting any value out of where you are, you want to stick around because it's easy, or you want to go somewhere else. But when you go somewhere else, you end up going to the same kind of work, and then you see that again wherever you go, right? So that having a conversation with yourself, being candid with yourself about what do you really want, may keep that from happening again and again and again throughout a career. I've seen people go through an entire career being unhappy.
Yeah.
And they've been in several different jobs. Mm-hmm. But at the end, they did the same work. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. So understanding and being, taking the time, taking that pause to be more self-aware, reflect on what do I really want? Yeah. The other thing that she brought up for us to consider when we're thinking about bringing forward something that may be difficult for other people to hear, that might actually spark some fear in you about bringing something forward, is to make sure that you have done your homework around searching out data. So rather than it just being a reaction to an emotion or just saying, this is what I feel, but is there a survey that you can point to, or have you taken the time to gather some data that helps you make your case? So again, it's a bit of a pause to say, maybe I need to talk to a few people so that I'm not just coming at this, especially if it is something of high emotion or there's a lot of commitment to whatever the current path is. People haven't really embraced that there's something that does need to be changed, but thinking about how do I bring something to this that creates more of a conversation and gets it outside of just this is about you and me, and it gets personal.
Yeah, it's when I worked in healthcare, we called that evidence-based. So there's evidence to support your stand or to support your position, and it's so important, right? You don't want to do it based on a feeling, because while we may trust our feelings, there's always going to be people who don't, and that's a need to have a relationship building, maybe a rapport building, but we all have a different experience, right? We don't all see things the same way. So with evidence, it takes away the emotion and really puts it where it needs to be, which is we have some facts to support what's not working, why it's not working. And here's what we need to do. We need to own the fact that we're not making the grade on this right now, right?
Yeah.
And we need to talk about what could we possibly do? Do we need to trash it? Do we need to re-engineer it? What do we need to do, right?
Yeah. It opens up the conversation about now what's possible.
Right.
Yeah. If we can all agree that this isn't working and here's the data to support that, now we can look at, well, what might work better?
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, candor is something that is not easy, right? It could be really hard for some people to be brave enough, and that's it. It takes bravery to stand up and say things that are not necessarily popular or not going to be accepted well. Sometimes that has to do with the rapport and the level of respect that everybody has for each other. But for a leader to be candid and maybe have not done a lot in the past with being candid with other people, there are ways that they can grow that muscle, It doesn't have to be a big event, right?
Yeah.
You can grow candor muscle with small, brave moves, right?
Yeah. And it's so important because one of the things that Shirlene brought up was that if we don't have candor, if we don't share what's important to us, and we continue to kind of stuff that down, that there's real consequences to that, that there's, we can end up in burnout, which really means that we're just kind of disengaged. We're not bringing our best self for sure to the work, that there's impacts to our health, impacts our happiness, both at work and outside of work.
There are team building exercises that are out there for like retreats and stuff that actually work on helping people be candid with one another in the exercise. And it's not a bad idea for, if you have a department or organization that isn't used to spending a lot of time in that mode. Think about, get a facilitator to come in and facilitate an exercise on how to be candid and make it so that it's risk-free. And that everybody understands that whatever they're doing is in the room. It's not personal. It's just an exercise. But what it's doing is it's creating awareness and, giving people a little practice time to see if they can at least exercise that muscle during the day that they're in that retreat and see that they don't melt. Because that's sort of what one reason some people don't want to be candid is they don't want to hurt people's feelings, or they don't want to, a meltdown themselves, so they do what's safe. The fear often does that to people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing that we can think about also is that disagreement is not fighting, right? So if you're being candid and you're talking about something that is maybe a critical issue, or bringing something to the table that if I'm being candid about something and not everybody agrees with me, that's not a fight. In some businesses it's expected that you're going to have that disagreement, that you're going to let your passions get a little high and all of that with the intention of coming to the center again. And usually there's someone who helps facilitate that, somebody in the room. Let's say we're in a meeting and something isn't working and we need to have that conversation. But it's probably going to be met with some disagreement because there are people who may not feel that it's not working. They may feel it's working just fine. But in a really healthy team, in a high-performing team, those kind of disagreements are okay. That's where you get everybody's thoughts out on the table too. It's like, okay, so maybe the questions are, what if we're wrong? What if we go forward like this and we're wrong? What then?
Yeah.
Or what if we were to go down this road and somebody else were to come in and disagree with that? How do we approach that? How do we address that we chose this path because? So having disagreements in the room and getting all that stuff out on the table. So what doesn't seem right, and why is this right? Why is this the right way? What else could we be doing? That might get some people kind of hot because especially if they work with whatever the tool is or whatever the process is, and they've been doing workarounds for years and they think, we always do it that way.
Yeah.
And now we're trying to figure out a new way to do something or a new way to see the organization, right?
Yeah.
Often this stuff starts with a reorg or something or trying to re-engineer, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think sometimes by creating, you kind of started with those questions, by creating even part of your working guidelines, some questions that we always ask, like you were saying, like, how about we take another perspective? How could we explain this to a fifth grader? Just trying to create some different perspectives before we all sort of nod our head in agreement. And that practice makes it less personal because, we're going to do this every time, whether it's my project or your project. And I know that if we're doing my project, next week it's your project, I'm going to think about that in a certain way. Not that we want to shut anybody down, but how we actually engage with those questions in a more supportive, compassionate way rather than sort of tearing people down. But how can we take this approach where we're okay with being sort of putting the problem in the middle and we're all working it, because I know that it's in service to this project being better and the outcome will be better. But if we engage that as part of, or implement it as part of our normal practice, this is just what we do, it helps to build that muscle because we're doing it every week.
I love what you just said. And the reason is I'm thinking, you know, of course, all of that needs some setup.
Yeah.
Right. And so if it's going to become a normal practice, I think it would be great for a leader and perhaps a few representatives of that team to get together prior to a meeting and say, let's create a role play where we show people what this looks like so that they don't get frightened or, you know, disturbed about what path we're recommending. And that in itself is candor. We're getting ready to move into a new realm, and we're going to allow disagreements to push us in the right direction or push us, you know, in a new direction. So we're going to ask you to be candid with us too. And here's what a situation might look like. And let's just practice it. And we're going to fumble it for a while and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I worked on this really great team. After every leadership development workshop, we would come together and do a debrief that day, right afterwards. And we'd clean up the room and then we'd all sit down. And we always let the person who led the development and led the facilitation go first. And I think they were usually less positive than the rest of the team was. So they got some additional accolades, but also the places where they struggled, they knew where they struggled. And so by them having the first crack at saying, this was challenging. I wish I would have maybe, I know for me, I'm always overpacking stuff. So how do we simplify this? Mm-hmm. And then everybody would sort of help out with thinking about, oh, well, here's some things you might want to think about. And that was really helpful. And it never felt personal. It was always in service to let's make this better. And by having that person go first, it was really helpful for them to sort of disarm and not feel like they had to defend.
Yeah, that's really important. And I know that debriefs right after a session are always hard to have because whoever's facilitating does feel like, oh, I blew it here, or or we took too much time. And I just felt, or I just went on and on about one thing. And it's not that they're necessarily fishing. They just feel like they need to let it go, and that's the one place to let it go. That's also candor in a sense. It's like, here's where I blew it. But the thing is that, to your point, they get more accolades because the people that aren't in their head and are watching them from a distance may not see that.
Yeah. Yeah. But it felt like a collaborative process because a lot of times what we did is actually focus on, well, what would we do next time rather than what happened this time? But of course, it was informed by what happened that time. So you knew that, the next time I do this, it's going to be easier. It's going to be better.
That's a great model. Yeah. A great model. So, yeah.
I know. The other thing I wanted to say about that, which is along the same line, was that if you're new to it, if you're new to candor and it's something that you feel a lot of sort of anxiousness around, start small. Mm-hmm. So really thinking about how can I start to practice this and start to build that muscle in a way that might not be as important, but starting with smaller conversations so that when you have to have a maybe something that has a little more emotion to it or a little more consequence as a result of whatever the outcome is going to be, that you're feeling more confident in being able to bring these things forward by the time you get to the most important conversations.
Well, and I love that you mentioned that because also when you are starting out, there's going to be a need to think out or, put some thought into how you're going to do it. And so you might even want to just, quiet your space, get into a quiet space and kind of breathe through it a little bit and just get centered before you have that kind of conversation because you might be going into something that can be pretty emotional. But another thing is to write down what you want to say.
Yeah.
And so you don't forget it. I know that if I am doing something new that I've not done before and I don't have a cheat sheet, I just need a few bullet points, But if I don't have those, I might, and you know me better than anybody, I might just ramble and do all sorts of things that have nothing to do with anything. And I'm like an octopus. And then there's this idea and this idea. And it doesn't get to the point. So writing it down can be really helpful. It keeps you on track. And then once again, we've seen this before, go ahead and start this, but keep curiosity at the front of your brain here.
Yeah.
Stay curious. Don't listen to rebut or to argue, but listen to kind of hear what other people are saying and keep it curious. What does that mean? And you might ask more and more questions, deeper diving questions. You peel that onion until you get to what is at the core of that person's issue or whatever they're saying. So, yeah, that's another way to build the candor muscle, right?
Yeah. The other thing I think sometimes, I don't want to say it softens the message, but it does sort of set the message up sometimes for it to be heard in a different way, is to ask permission for timing, not permission for actually giving the feedback, because if the feedback needs to be given, it needs to be given. But saying something like, I have some feedback that might be difficult to hear, and I want to share it with you because I know it'll help us be successful. Is this a good time to share that? Then they have a choice. They can either say, yeah, I've got time to actually unpack this with you, or how about let's do it in our next one-on-one or something like that. And unless it's super time sensitive, being okay with allowing the person to have a little control over when they get that feedback.
Right. And I agree with that. In fact, it's one of the biggest things I coach some of my leaders on is that when you're giving feedback, be sure to ask permission first. And that is, are you open for some feedback right now? And if they aren't, they're going to tell you no. When would be a good time for us?
Yeah.
And that way they have the person who is going to be receiving the feedback has the choice to say, no, this isn't a good time right now, or yeah, I've got time right now. Do you have time? You have to remember that when somebody accepts that, they've opened the door, and that means the feedback flows.
Yeah.
But if they haven't, you have to respect that, because they may not be in a headspace where they can actually have that conversation. And when we're talking about candor and people feeling maybe a little attacked by that, it's your approach is so important.
Yeah.
And I was thinking also in terms of getting to a place where you feel like you are practicing your candor muscle so that you are feeling you can be candid, but allow others to be candid with you in that practice.
Yeah.
Solicit it. Please, I need a candid, your candid view of something that we're working on right now.
Yeah.
How am I meeting our expectations, if your expectations? Or, just ask those kinds of questions about how am I doing with respect to you and the team? Or, what are you seeing that you don't find helpful? Or what are you seeing that you do find helpful? It's a good way to get that kind of feedback that can help inform you for the next meetings, but it also gets you in the mode of receiving as well as giving.
Yeah.
And when that becomes comfortable for everybody, when people aren't so uncomfortable with feedback or any conversation that they get defensive, then you come into a highly effective team, because they're willing to talk about things that are uncomfortable without having the emotion come into play so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think both of them are giving, but also if we can give them a little bit of a template for when we're receiving, that simple situation behavior impact model is really helpful. Mm-hmm. So then we can do something about it. It's like, when did this happen? Right. What did you actually observe? What was the behavior, and what was the impact?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, that really helps us when we receive that feedback to be able to actually do something different.
So when we're talking now, we're talking about feedback, but it is candor. It is all about candor, right? And it's important for leaders to understand that if they're going to be giving feedback, they really need to be prepared to have answers like that. You know, if I am giving somebody feedback and I don't have any of the details, we've been talking about, have your data, right?
Yeah.
Then I have no feedback. I might be just giving you hearsay.
Yeah.
Right? And that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because we want to be able to do something as a result of this conversation.
Right. Having the data makes you credible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then really important leadership concept. I know our listeners have heard us talk about this before, but how important it is to take some time to self-reflect. How did I do on giving this candor? Or even how did I do receiving it? Mm-hmm. Is there something I still have yet to say? Did I avoid actually saying what was probably the hardest thing to say? Have I avoided that? What was the reaction of the people that I shared this information with? What was the story in my own head that might have not been true? And as we build this muscle, what got easier? So hopefully over time, as you practice this more and more, it will get easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there might even be another question there, and it might be one that you take a little time before you ask it, and that is, okay, so given all of that, what will I do differently the next time?
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. Yeah. So constantly helping us get better as leaders because we're in a learning mode.
For our entire careers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Any effective leader is going to be willing to be in learning mode forever. That's not necessarily what you learn when you go into work and you hear about climbing your ladder, right?
No.
It's like, you mean I have to keep learning?
Yeah. It's a sign of a good leader.
It is.
It is the only way to be a good leader, is to recognize that we can do things better. We really enjoyed our conversation with Shirlene, and there were so many great gems in that episode. We obviously didn't get to all of them, but we do encourage you to go back and listen to that whole episode. And we hope this kind of double clicking on this concept around candor as a way really to light that spark.
Yes.
So we want to have honest conversations with people so that we can find our own spark and not be diminishing that because we're constantly stuffing down what we know to be true. And also hopefully lighting a spark in other people, even though it's difficult to hear. I know it's amazing with coaching clients when we call it heat. We do a little bit of heat where we're reflecting back maybe something that they don't want to hear. We might be giving 360 feedback that might be hard. When we can get through that difficult time, they can see and we can talk about what's possible now. Right. And that's where the spark really starts to become a flame.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that you said that.
So as we come to a close, we invite you to pause for just a moment and ask yourself, what spark was lit for me today? And where can I take one small, meaningful action? This year, our focus is clear. Light the spark, ignite genuine hope, and lead the change. Because hope isn't passive. It's something we practice through intentional, everyday choices. Leadership begins when we take what resonates and allow it to shape how we show up for others. And if this episode resonated with you, share it on your social media so the spark can travel even farther. We hope you'll keep listening because we have more exceptional podcast episodes coming up with more fantastic guests. So be sure to subscribe to Lifting Leaders Podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. If you're looking for help in developing your leaders or would like a growth opportunity yourself, please contact us through our website at www.liftingleaderspodcast.com. Thank you to Ari Chance Roberts for his technical support of our show. Finally, please take 30 seconds to follow us. It helps you because you never miss an episode, and it helps us
because you never miss an episode.
To follow us, go to the Lifting Leaders Podcast show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Then just tap the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner or click on follow. While you're there, if you'd be willing to give us a 5-star rating and review and share the episode with a friend, we'd be so grateful. Thank you, Trisha, for another great, engaging conversation.
Thank you. It was quite a gem.
Many thanks to you, our listeners. We appreciate you. Until next time, keep lifting leaders.
Bye.